Radio stations pulled them, governments banned them, parents called them dangerous, and yet somehow everybody heard them anyway. Here are 13 forbidden rock songs from 60s and 70s you weren't supposed to play. Number 13, Louie Louie by the Kingsmen, 1963. Louie Louie was recorded by the Kingsmen in a single take in April 1963 at a Portland, Oregon recording studio, with lead vocalist Jack Ely shouting the lyrics while wearing braces on his teeth and singing into a microphone positioned far above his head. The result was a track in which the words were almost entirely unintelligible, slurred, distorted, and buried under the band's churning rhythm. That unintelligibility turned out to be the most important thing about it. The song reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100 in late 1963 and became one of the most played records of the year. Then the rumors started. Listeners who could not quite make out the lyrics began circulating the theory that the words were sexually explicit, that the muddiness of the recording was deliberate, a way of hiding obscene content in plain sight on commercial radio. The rumor spread rapidly, and complaints began reaching radio stations, the FCC, and eventually the FBI. The FBI investigated the recording for 31 months. Agents played the track at multiple speeds, faster, slower, in reverse, in an attempt to isolate the alleged obscene content. Their final report, released in 1965, concluded that the lyrics were unintelligible at any speed and that no obscene content could be identified. The FCC dismissed all complaints. The actual lyrics, written by Richard Berry in 1955, describe a Jamaican sailor telling a bartender named Louie about his girlfriend. Nothing more. The song has been covered over 1,600 times by artists across virtually every genre. The Kingsmen's version specifically became the subject of a legal and regulatory investigation that lasted nearly 3 years and found nothing, which is itself one of the more remarkable documents of American moral panic in the 1960s. Number 12, A Day in the Life by the Beatles, 1967.
I read the news today, oh boy.
The Beatles released A Day in the Life in June 1967 as the closing track of Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band. The BBC banned it within weeks of release, citing a line interpreted as a reference to a drug-induced high. The corporation's formal statement identified the lyric in question and declared that the song should not be broadcast on BBC channels. The ban was enforced consistently on BBC radio and television throughout the song's commercial peak. It did not prevent the album from selling in extraordinary quantities. Sgt. Pepper's spent 27 weeks at number 1 in the United Kingdom, but it did mean that British listeners who wanted to hear the closing track of the year's most celebrated album could not do so through the national broadcaster that most of them listened to daily. American radio stations largely ignored the BBC's reasoning and played the track freely on album-oriented FM stations, where it became a staple of the underground radio format that was developing in parallel with the commercial AM market. The song's orchestral climax, a full orchestra instructed to play from its lowest note to its highest in 24 bars, was unlike anything on radio at the time. John Lennon consistently maintained that the relevant lyric was not a drug reference, and most serious examinations of the song's composition and lyrical content have supported that position. The BBC's ban remained in place for years regardless. Paul McCartney has spoken about the situation with evident frustration in multiple interviews over the decades. The song is now universally regarded as one of the greatest recordings in the history of popular music, and the BBC ban is regarded as one of the institution's less defensible moments.
Having read the book.
Number 11, Eve of Destruction by Barry Maguire, 1965.
Tell me over and over and over.
Barry Maguire had been a member of the New Christy Minstrels before going solo, and Eve of Destruction was the song that defined his solo career in the most total and irreversible way possible. The song was written by 19-year-old P.F. Sloan and recorded by Maguire in a single session in July 1965. So quickly that Maguire was still reading the lyrics from a sheet of paper during the take, and the rough vocal was used on the released version. Eve of Destruction reached number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100 in September 1965, making it one of the most commercially successful protest songs ever recorded. It was also one of the most banned. Radio stations across the United States refused to play it, citing its explicitly anti-war and anti-establishment content at a time when American involvement in Vietnam was escalating significantly. The Armed Forces Radio Network banned it outright.
You don't believe in war, but what's that gun you're toting?
Some stations cited its pessimistic view of American society as unpatriotic. The song's content was specific and direct in ways that most pop music of the period avoided entirely. It addressed segregation, the draft, nuclear proliferation, and American foreign policy without any of the metaphorical distance that made protest music more palatable to mainstream audiences. That directness was precisely what made radio programmers uncomfortable and audiences fascinated. Maguire never had another comparable hit. The song that made him famous was so entirely of its political moment and so completely identified with a specific stance that following it was essentially impossible. He later became a Christian artist and has spoken about his spiritual journey extensively. Eve of Destruction remains his singular commercial achievement and one of the most instructive examples of how a banned song can become more famous because of the ban than it would have been without it.
We're on the eve of destruction.
Number 10, My Generation by The Who, 1965. The Who released My Generation in November of 1965, and it reached number 2 in the United Kingdom. The BBC considered banning it on the grounds that its stuttering vocal delivery, written by Pete Townshend to mimic the speech patterns of someone under the influence of amphetamines, would be offensive to people with speech impediments. The debate within the corporation was documented, and the song was ultimately played, though not without internal resistance. In the United States, the song's lyric expressing the hope of dying before getting old generated complaints from parent groups and concerns among radio programmers about its message to young audiences. The combination of the stuttering delivery and the sentiment about death made it a target for the kind of institutional anxiety about rock and roll that characterized the mid-1960s establishment response to youth culture generally.
Get around, talking about my generation.
The song became one of the most recognizable anthems of a generation precisely because the establishment found it objectionable. The Who performed it at virtually every major concert of the period, often ending the performance by destroying their instruments on stage, a practice that was genuinely illegal in terms of the property damage it caused at venues that had not anticipated it. The contradiction between the song's anti-authority message and the authorities' attempts to suppress it gave it an energy that a purely commercial record could never have generated. Townshend has spoken about the song's creation many times, consistently describing it as an honest expression of the alienation he felt as a young man from a working-class background, navigating a cultural establishment that regarded him with condescension. That honesty is audible in the recording in a way that cannot be manufactured. Number 9, Strange Fruit by Billie Holiday, 1939, widely played and banned through the 1960s.
The sudden smell
Strange Fruit was originally recorded by Billie Holiday in 1939, but it was subject to active suppression and banning campaigns through the 1950s and into the 1960s as the civil rights movement brought its subject matter into sharper national focus. The song, based on a poem by Abel Meeropol, a Jewish school teacher from the Bronx who published it under the pseudonym Lewis Allen, addressed the lynching of Black Americans in the American South with an imagery so direct and so devastating that it functioned as both a piece of art and a political act simultaneously. NBC refused to allow Holiday to perform it on her radio broadcast.
In the southern breeze.
Her label, Columbia Records, refused to record it, and she recorded it instead on the smaller Commodore label. When it was played in clubs, some venue operators required her to perform it last, so that audiences who were disturbed by it could leave without disrupting the rest of the program. Through the 1960s, as the civil rights movement made the subject of the song impossible to look away from, it was banned by radio stations that did not want to engage with its content and championed by others as a necessary piece of American music. The song had been recorded before many of the listeners who were encountering it in that decade were born. Its subject was not historical, it was contemporary, and everyone knew it. Holiday died in 1959. The song continued to do its work without her.
Blood on the leaves.
Number 8, The Pill by Loretta Lynn, 1975.
And on me when I was your girl.
Loretta Lynn released The Pill in 1975, and it immediately became one of the most banned songs on country radio. The song addressed oral contraception directly and from a woman's point of view, celebrating the freedom that birth control offered married women and presenting that freedom as entirely positive and entirely deserved. For country radio stations in the mid-1970s, that was far too direct. More than 60 radio stations refused to play it. Some cited its subject matter as inappropriate for broadcast. Others received complaints from listeners and community groups. The Country Music Association did not include it in any of its award categories for the year, a snub that was widely interpreted as institutional disapproval. Despite all of this, The Pill reached number 5 on the Billboard country charts and became one of Lynn's best-selling singles.
And every year that's gone by.
The audience for the song was considerably less interested in the opinions of radio programmers than those programmers had assumed. Lynn herself was unapologetic and has discussed the song's reception in interviews with a directness consistent with her broader public persona. She viewed the song as a statement about the lives of real women, women like herself, who had married young and had multiple children, and the response it received confirmed rather than challenged her view that those lives were underrepresented in the music that claimed to speak for them. The fact that a song celebrating contraception was banned by country radio in 1975 is a precise measurement of the distance between the world the genre's gatekeepers imagined and the world the genre's listeners actually inhabited.
And your brooder house, 'cause now I've got the pill.
Number 7, One Toke Over the Line by Brewer and Shipley, 1970.
One toke over the line, sweet Jesus.
Brewer and Shipley were a folk rock duo, Mike Brewer and Tom Shipley, who recorded One Toke Over the Line in 1970 and released it as a single in 1971. The song reached number 10 on the Billboard Hot 100 and was played on mainstream radio with enough frequency to make it a genuine hit. The title was, To Anyone Paying Attention, an explicit reference to marijuana use. The word toke had no ambiguous interpretation in 1971. The Nixon administration included the song on a list of songs with drug-related content that the administration encouraged radio stations to review and consider not broadcasting. The administration's communications office sent notices to stations highlighting the drug reference. Some stations pulled the song, others continued to play it. The most remarkable aspect of the song's cultural history is that it was performed on the Lawrence Welk Show, a primetime television variety program known for its wholesome, family-friendly content, by Gail Farrell and Dick Dale, who introduced it as a modern spiritual. Lawrence Welk himself later said that he had not realized what the lyrics referred to when he approved the performance. The footage of this performance exists and remains one of the more surreal documents of the early 1970s music landscape. A song about marijuana intoxication, performed with complete sincerity on the most aggressively square television program of its era. Brewer and Shipley have spoken about the song's history with considerable amusement over the decades. The Lawrence Welk performance became the story that followed the song everywhere, overshadowing even the Nixon administration's attention.
In a railway station, one took over the line.
Number 6, Alice's Restaurant Massacre by Arlo Guthrie, 1967.
This song's called Alice's Restaurant. It's about Alice.
Arlo Guthrie released Alice's Restaurant Massacre in 1967 as an 18-minute talking blues narrative describing in considerable comic detail how being arrested for illegally dumping garbage ultimately led to him being declared unfit for military service during the Vietnam War draft. The song was too long for commercial radio in any conventional sense and was never released as a standard single. Despite this, or because of it, the song became one of the most significant pieces of anti-war musical communication of the Vietnam era. FM radio stations with album-oriented formats played the full 18 minutes. It became a Thanksgiving tradition on certain stations, played every year in its entirety on the holiday it references.
You can get anything you want at Alice's.
Stations that played it received complaints from listeners who found its anti-draft sentiment unpatriotic, and from draft boards that objected to its characterization of military induction processes. The song was adapted into a feature film directed by Arthur Penn in 1969, with Guthrie playing himself. The film was well received critically and gave the song additional cultural reach. Guthrie has performed the full version of Alice's Restaurant Massacre in concert virtually every year since 1967, including at concert events where the performance itself became the tradition that the song describes. The draft it satirized ended in 1973. The song has continued to be performed and broadcast since, retaining its particular combination of folk comedy and political weight long after the specific circumstances it documented had passed.
We're just waiting for it to come around is what we're doing.
Number 5, Walk on the Wild Side by Lou Reed, 1972.
Said, hey honey, take a walk on the wild side.
Lou Reed released Walk on the Wild Side in 1972 as part of the album Transformer, produced by David Bowie and Mick Ronson. The song reached number 16 on the Billboard Hot 100 in the United States and number 10 in the United Kingdom. A remarkable commercial performance for a track that described, by name and in specific detail, transgender women, male prostitution, drug use, and oral sex. The BBC played it without banning it, apparently because the specific slang term used in the song was not recognized by the censors reviewing the content. That oversight has been discussed many times since, usually with some combination of amusement and disbelief. American radio stations played it in similarly inadvertent ignorance of portions of its content, with the result that one of the most sexually explicit and gender transgressive songs of the decade became a mainstream radio hit.
Holly came from Miami, FLA.
Reed based the song's characters on real people from Andy Warhol's factory. The artistic and social community around Warhol in New York City that had served as the inspiration for the Velvet Underground's earlier work. Holly Woodlawn, Candy Darling, Joe D'Alessandro, Jackie Curtis, and Joe Campbell, referenced in the song as the Colored Girls, were real figures whose lives Reed documented with the kind of specificity that most popular music of the period would have considered impossible subject matter. Reed died in October 2013. The song's content, which made it genuinely radical in 1972, has become a standard reference point in discussions of LGBTQ representation in popular music.
She says, hey babe, take a walk on the wild side.
Number 4, Let's Spend the Night Together by the Rolling Stones, 1967. The Rolling Stones released Let's Spend the Night Together as a single in January 1967, and it was immediately banned by the BBC on the grounds of its sexually suggestive content. The title was considered too explicit for broadcast without modification, and the corporation refused to add it to its playlist. The song reached number 3 in the United Kingdom, despite the ban, and number 55 in the United States. The more documented story concerns the band's appearance on The Ed Sullivan Show in January 1967. Sullivan's team informed the Stones that they would be required to change the song's title and its central lyric to "Let's Spend Some Time Together" if they wished to perform on the program.
Don't you worry about what's on your mind, oh no.
Mick Jagger complied on air, rolling his eyes visibly at the camera each time he sang the altered lyric, a piece of silent commentary that was more effective than any protest speech could have been. The footage of that performance, with Jagger's eyes rolling as he sanitized the lyric in real time, became one of the most referenced images of censorship in rock history. The band had been through a version of this situation before. Their 1966 appearance on the same show had required them to change "Let's Spend the Night Together" in advance. Sullivan's insistence on propriety and the Stones' fundamental contempt for it produced a dynamic that the television audience witnessed without fully understanding, and that rock historians have been analyzing since. Number 3, White Rabbit by Jefferson Airplane, 1967. Jefferson Airplane released White Rabbit in June 1967, and it reached number 8 on the Billboard Hot 100. The song was written by Grace Slick, who had been developing it since her time with her previous band, The Great Society. Its structure borrowed from the bolero, a gradual, inexorable build from quiet to overwhelming, and its lyrical frame drew on Lewis Carroll's Alice's adventures in Wonderland and Through the Looking Glass to construct an extended drug allegory that was clear enough to be understood and indirect enough to evade the most aggressive radio censors. Several radio stations banned it regardless. The references to pills, mushrooms, and the instruction to feed one's head were understood clearly enough by anyone paying attention, and the Nixon administration's subsequent list of drug-related content included it.
If you go chasing rabbits.
The BBC debated it internally before allowing airplay. Slick has discussed the song's creation in interviews many times, noting that she wrote it partly in response to what she perceived as the hypocrisy of children's literature. Carroll's books were full of substances that altered Alice's size and perception, presented to children as imaginative fantasy, while the same imagery applied to adults was treated as a social crisis. The song made that observation in a way that was musically commanding and lyrically compact, which is why it worked as a pop single despite its subject matter. Jefferson Airplane became one of the defining bands of the San Francisco psychedelic scene, and White Rabbit became the song that most precisely captured the era's particular relationship with consciousness, authority, and cultural transgression. Number 2, Ohio by Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young, 1970. Neil Young wrote Ohio in response to the killings at Kent State University on May 4, 1970, when Ohio National Guard troops opened fire on student protesters demonstrating against the United States invasion of Cambodia, killing 4 students and wounding 9 others. Young wrote the song within days of the event, and Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young recorded and released it within weeks. The speed of that process, from event to release single, was unusual for the era and reflected the urgency all 4 members felt about the material. The song reached number 14 on the Billboard Hot 100, despite being banned by numerous radio stations that refused to play music they regarded as an attack on the United States government and military. Some stations received pressure from ownership groups or advertisers. Others made the decision independently. The song's lyric named President Nixon directly and described the event at Kent State in unambiguous terms, which gave station managers a clear political choice with no neutral option. The song was recorded at a time when Crosby, Stills, Nash, and Young were at the peak of their commercial power. Deja Vu had been released in March 1970 and was one of the best-selling albums of the year. The decision to rush Ohio to release as a standalone single with no album to support it commercially demonstrated a prioritization of the message over any business calculation. The 4 members have all spoken about the recording session in interviews over the years, consistently describing it as one of the most emotionally charged sessions any of them had been part of. The 4 students killed at Kent State were Allison Krauss, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Scheuer, and William Knox Schroeder. The song named them by implication, by naming the event, in a way that no news broadcast of the period approached with comparable directness. 1. Lola by the Kinks, 1970. The Kinks released Lola in June 1970, and it reached number 2 in the United Kingdom and number 9 in the United States. The song described a romantic encounter between a young man and a woman named Lola, who turns out, by the song's end, to be transgender, a subject that was genuinely transgressive for mainstream pop radio in 1970, and that Ray Davies handled with a warmth and specificity that made it simultaneously a pop hit and a quiet act of representation. The BBC banned it, but not for the reason most people assume. The BBC's objection was not to the song's subject matter, but to a lyric that referenced Coca-Cola by name, which the corporation considered a violation of its rules against product advertising and broadcast content. Davies flew back from a tour in the United States to re-record the lyric, substituting a generic reference for the brand name, and the revised version was cleared for broadcast. The irony is that the BBC's concern about a soft drink brand led to no comparable scrutiny of the song's actual subject. Its affectionate, matter-of-fact portrayal of a transgender woman at a time when the topic was essentially absent from mainstream pop culture entirely. The song reached its chart positions without significant controversy about its content in either the UK or the United States, which makes it unusual in this list. The establishment that was willing to ban songs for drug references, anti-war sentiment, and sexual content apparently found an honest portrayal of gender fluidity in a pop song unremarkable. Davies has said that the song was based on a real encounter he witnessed rather than a personal experience. The specificity of Lola's character, her voice, her walk, the Soho Club where the narrator meets her, gives the song the quality of a genuine memory rather than a constructed scenario, which is part of what makes it endure. It was a number 2 hit in Britain and a top 10 hit in the United States, which means it was heard by an enormous mainstream audience in 1970 without generating the kind of backlash that the BBC ban on Coca-Cola might have led one to expect. The song treated its subject with dignity, and the audience returned the favor by making it a hit. The 1960s and 1970s produced more band music than any other era in modern history, and almost all of it found its audience anyway. The attempts to silence these songs are now footnotes. The songs themselves are still playing. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more history documentaries.